Folks, welcome back to another episode of The Fallen Badge. Today we're going to look at the murder of U.S. Marshals Kenneth Muir, Robert Cheshire, and Sheriff Harold Matthews. Marshal Muir was 53 years old. He had a wife and 3 kids. A Deputy Marshal Cheshire, he had a wife and 3 kids. And Sheriff Matthews, he was divorced, but he had 3 kids as well. Now, Marshal Muir, he had 24 years on with the Marshal service. And Deputy Cheshire had 5 years on with the Marshal service. Now, the information I'm going to use primarily for this episode is going to come from the appellate court, federal appellate court. Now, the fellow we're going to be talking about, actually there's going to be several of them. In fact, so many of them I'm going to have to use their first names so I can keep them all straight. But the primary fella in this whole thing, his name's Gordon. Now, in 1977, he was convicted on 2 counts of failing to file income tax returns. Well, we would all like to not have to pay federal income tax. So now he spent a little time in the federal poking, and he got out, and they put him on probation. Now, in 1980, he was supposed to appear in federal court on a probation violation, but now he didn't show up. So the court put a warrant out for him. Now that's down in the great state of Texas is where all that was going on. So now the Marshal Service is looking for him. Now on February 10th, 1983, there was a bolo put out for this suspect, this probation violator. It was for the area of North Dakota, the general area where they thought that old Gordon might show up. They have the vehicle description for him as well. Now you see this fella Gordon, he was a member of the group known as Posse Comitatus, which this group thought it was unconstitutional to have to pay taxes. So that's what this group did. They didn't pay taxes and they complained about it. And as we're going to see, they're kind of violent when it comes to this kind of stuff. It's February 13th, 1983. Now this fella Gordon, he's having a meeting. He's having that meeting with a fella named Scott and a fella named Yori. Now that's Gordon's son. And another fella named David, and then there's some other people. Now they're meeting up at the Medina Medical Clinic there in the town of Medina, North Dakota. Now that town Medina sits kind of halfway between Fargo and Bismarck, North Dakota. Well, anyways, they're having this meeting. Well, a deputy sheriff, he's cruising through town there, and he knows about that bolo on Gordon. Now, he knows who Gordon is. He sees a vehicle there at the little medical clinic, and he's pretty sure that's going to be Gordon's vehicle, and that Gordon's probably up in there. Now, this deputy sheriff named Cap, he hollers at the U.S. Marshal service there. I don't know if he called the Fargo office or the Bismarck, but either way, he calls the Marshals and lets them know that old Gordon's in Medina. Now, the Marshals asked the deputy Cap to keep an eye on the place and that they're sending agents there as quick as they can. So now, Deputy U.S. Marshal Robert Cheshire and another agent named James Hobson. They head out down the road from Bismarck. Now they're going to meet up with Marshal Muir and Deputy Marshal Wigglesworth. Now they're coming from Fargo. So now while Deputy Cap's sitting there watching the clinic waiting on the marshals, he sees Gordon and Scott and Yori and a lady named Joan who's married to Gordon. Sees the four of them coming out of the clinic, and they came out of that north door into the parking lot, and he sees them getting in Gordon's Chrysler station wagon. Now at this particular time, old Gordon's wearing a blue baseball cap and a bright blue windbreaker. Now the deputy can see that all three men in this group are all armed, and it looks like they're all carrying Ruger Mini 14s, which is a bad news rifle. Some of you that saw my episodes on the Miami shootout involving the FBI, then you'll know just how much damage that Mini 14 can do. Now Deputy Cap's sitting there watching them, and he sees that Yori points in his direction talking to the group, which tells him that they know he's sitting there. So now after a couple minutes, the four of them go back in the clinic. And then one of them comes out and they move Gordon's vehicle back around to the side of the clinic and where Deputy Cap can't see it. Now information would come out later in court that while they were back in the clinic, old Gordon and Scott and Yori and David and the others are in there trying to plot what they should do to try to get Gordon out of there, because everybody knows that Gordon's wanted, or they're pretty sure. Now while they're in there, this fella David, he calls the chief of police for Medina. Chief's name is Graff, and he asks him about that bolo on Gordon. He's asking him about it because, according to the court records, David had first heard about it 2 days earlier from the chief. Now, David ends up making 2 different phone calls to Chief Graff, according to the court records. And after these 2 phone calls, everybody in the little clinic, members or hangers-oners of Posse Comitatus, they know they got to do something to get Gordon out of there. So what they ended up doing was Yori and Gordon, father and son, they changed clothing. Yori puts on his daddy's blue windbreaker, and Gordon puts on his son's brown ski jacket. Now they're getting ready to leave, and David, he suggests that Gordon should climb into David's vehicle. And they tell a fellow that's there for the meeting named Vernon, they tell old Vernon, go, you better ride in a Gordon station wagon. So now everybody's swapping up their cars. Now, before they've left the clinic, the Marshals show up from Bismarck and Fargo. Now what they decide to do, and I just don't know if I quite would have done it this way, but you know, hindsight 2020. If I was going up against 3 fellas that's got semi-automatic weapons, I might want a lot more people than what I got. But anyways, nothing wrong with what they were doing. They're doing their job. So what they do is Marshal Muir and Deputy Marshal Wigglesworth, they go out of town northbound, and they're going to set up a roadblock, because they're pretty sure that's the way that Gordon's going to go. And they send Deputy Marshal Cheshire and Hobson, they go meet up with Cap. So anyways, they're watching, and sure enough, there's David's vehicle. It leaves from the clinic first. Now David's driving and Gordon's the passenger. Now right behind them is the Gordon vehicle, their car. Yori's driving and his mama's in the front seat. And Scott and Vernon, they're in the back seat. Both vehicles, they head westbound away from the clinic. And then they go back northbound out of Medina, where they're sitting with that roadblock. Now, the road they're on, it's got some hills on it, some little hills. So as they're traveling along, they see the roadblock up ahead. Now there's a Medina police officer named Officer Snabble. He's got his lights on top of his squad car turned on, flashing. And they see the other vehicles. So they have decided now that the little caravan, they're going to turn around, get back out of there. So they pull into a driveway there. That's on the north side of the highway, and they're going to turn around. Now, Marshal Muir, he saw the vehicles pull into the driveway. Now he gets on the radio and he tells Marshal Cheshire that, hey, they're turning around, because Cheshire and his partner, they can't see that the bad guys are turning around because they haven't topped the hill to see them. So now Marshal Muir and his partner and Officer Snabble, they drive up towards the suspects' vehicles. Now Cheshire, he turns on his red lights on the dash of his vehicle. He's driving an SUV. So now while the bad guys are trying to turn around, Deputy Marshal Cheshire's done blocked them in. Now Yorrie and Scott, they immediately get out of their car with their Mini 14s and they start pointing them at the marshals. And then Yorrie, he runs over to a utility pole. Now it's about 50 or 60 feet away. It would be, I guess you would call that northwest direction. He ran to that pole. Now Gordon, he gets out of David's vehicle that he'd been riding in with his Mini 14, and he's pointing at the officers. Well, now Deputies Cheshire and Hobson, they get out of their car and they got their guns, only they ain't got any rifles that I know of. I didn't see any in any of the material. But anyway, they're hollering at these fellas to put their guns down. And they're hollering at them, telling them, we're here to arrest Gordon. So now this goes on for the next couple of minutes. Well, old Scott, he decides he's going to take off running. So he runs back northbound towards a mobile home. Now Marshal Hobson, he radios and he tells Muir that Scott's running towards a mobile home. Well, Marshal Muir, he tells Deputy Marshal Wigglesworth to take off running, try to cut off Scott. So Wigglesworth, he's running through a pasture. He's going to try to cut Scott off. Now Marshal Hobson, he tells them again, we're here to arrest Gordon. And now that's where it gets a little confusion. Now there's some information that says that Marshal Hobson had done moved up to the back of one of the suspect vehicles. And then someone who it's believed to be Yorrie, he hollers out, look out behind you. And he's hollering at his daddy because his daddy's over there by the suspect cars. Now, Sheriff's Deputy Cap and some of the others on the scene, they testified that the first shot came from Yorrie by the telephone pole, utility pole. And that first shot, it hit Deputy Marshal Cheshire somewhere in the chest area. So then everybody opens up. Everybody starts shooting. Now Deputy Sheriff Cap says he returns fire at Yorrie with his shotgun. He says he don't think he hit him with the first round, but now he thinks he hit him with another shot. Now Marshal Muir, he's cranking off some rounds, and I do not know what kind of weapon he had. But one of his rounds hit Yorrie. And now during this firefight, Deputy Sheriff Cap, he gets shot. And now that round, my understanding is, tore his trigger finger off his hand. And I know that had to be painful. So now we got the deputy sheriff down. We got one of the U.S. Marshals down. Marshal Muir, he's hit. He's down. And then Officer Schnabel, he's hit in the leg and he's down. Now while all this is going on, Marshal Wigglesworth, he's done confronted old Scott. Now he estimates the distance at about 100 yards around that mobile home. And he identifies himself as a U.S. Marshal, and he tells old Scott to throw his rifle down. Well, Scott thought better of that. He jumped back at the corner of the mobile home and he cranks off rounds at Marshal Wigglesworth. 6 shell casings were found at the corner of the mobile home, so we got a pretty good idea how many times he shot at the Marshal. Now, witnesses would say that old Scott, he ran back to the scene and he's trying to help Yori because Yori's been shot up a little bit. Now, these witnesses would also say that both Scott and Gordon were cranking off rounds at Deputy Cap, who's trying to find him a safe place to hide out because he's missing a digit on his hand. And they see Scott helping Yori back to the vehicles. Then someone, there's a little confusion on who exactly did it, but someone walked up to Deputy U.S. Marshal Cheshire and shot him twice, point blank range, in the head. Now they're thinking it was David did it, but according to the investigation after that, they're pretty sure that it was Gordon that executed the Marshal. Now Scott, he loads Yori up into Officer Schnabel's police car. They drive off back into Medina. And right behind them was Gordon and his wife in their station wagon. And David and Vernon, they're in David's car. So their little caravan of bad guys and girls are all heading back into town. And there ain't a whole lot of people to really get after them because pretty well most of the police on the scene have been shot. Now, the entire confrontation, they're estimating, lasted 10 minutes. The total time for the shooting was less than 1 minute, and I read some accounts from officers on the scene said it was 30 seconds of just pure shooting. The little caravan of bad guys, they go to the little medical clinic there, right where they'd been earlier, so they can get some help for Yori. Well, Deputy Sheriff Cap, I'm assuming he recovered his finger, he arrives there too. They're taking him inside to try to get his finger sewn back on. Well, as you might guess, there was a little bit of a confrontation in the clinic. When it was all said and done, there was no more shooting. Scott and Gordon, they left the clinic in Officer Schnabel's police car. Now, later on, David and Vernon would turn themselves in that very day. Scott would turn himself in the next day. It takes him a little bit of time. In fact, about 3 weeks later, on June the 3rd, 1983, the FBI and the Marshal Service, they done figured out where Gordon's gone to. Gordon's done fled the state and he's down in Arkansas. So they get a search warrant. They're going to go hit a house because they're pretty sure that's where Gordon's laid up at. So now you get the FBI, Marshal Service, state troopers, local police. They go to this house. The house is one of those that's built into the side of a hill. You got 3 officers walk up to the front door because they got the place surrounded. So 3 of them are going to go in there. One of them's the sheriff of Lawrence County, because that's the county they're in. And that's Sheriff Matthews. Now, he's the big cheese, but he's going to go in. And with him is the Deputy U.S. Marshal and 1 Arkansas State Trooper. So now they done got the husband and wife that lived there, they done got them out of the house. So they're going through the house looking. Now, all of a sudden, old Gordon, he pops up. And all three of the officers are right around the kitchen. And Gordon fires. His round hits Sheriff Matthews, hits him left arm, enters his body in that opening around the armpit. We should be familiar with that by now, on how bad of a wound that is when it gets in there and it missed the vest. And we're talking about a rifle round, so sheriff gets hit, but now the sheriff cranks off at least one round, and his round hits Gordon in the head. But now the three officers, they retreat back out of the house. And now they're loading the sheriff up on a gurney, and he swears up and down now he's done killed Gordon. But now, you got a decision to make then. You going to send more people back in, or you going to do something else before you go back in? So the FBI says, okay, y'all go on, let's start popping tear gas. So they pop tear gas in there. Now there is a accusation that they poured some kerosene or diesel fuel or something through an air vent in the house. That's kind of strange. That sounds like something out of the Old West. But in any event, the house catches on fire. So now when they get the fire put out, they go in there, they find the charred remains of a human being. They end up determining, sure enough, that was Gordon. And that shootout occurred at about 5:58 p.m. Now, according to the medical examiner, Gordon died of one round to the head from a .41 caliber handgun. Now, the only officer on that scene with a .41 caliber handgun was the sheriff. Now, unfortunately, the sheriff, he's taken to the hospital and they're trying to save him and they can't do it. He's too bad tore up. So, Sheriff Matthews, he dies. So that's the end of the fellow that didn't want to pay his taxes. And we lost 3 good men cause of it. Marshal Kenneth B. Muir. Deputy Marshal Robert S. Cheshire. End of watch, February 13th, 1983. Sheriff Harold G. Matthews. End of watch, June 3rd, 1983.